Thanks for listening to the STEM Factually podcast. I'm Dr. Marissa Civic. This episode will focus on graduate programs in STEM, what they are, how to choose one, and how to get through one. I may do a multi-part episode. I'm starting to record now, and I'll see how long part one goes. So if it's not too long, it'll be one episode, and at the end, I'll let you know if I'm splitting it. So the audience for this is anyone with questions about what graduate school in STEM is, especially undergraduate students or high school students or parents who are interested in pursuing an advanced degree in STEM, or they know someone who is and want to learn a little more about it. So I'm going to go through and talk about kind of three main parts relevant to the goal here. And the first one will encompass what is graduate school in STEM and how to determine if graduate school is the right path for you. The second part will be how to choose a program and how to apply to a program. And the third part will be kind of what to expect once you're accepted, what comes next after that, and a general timeline for what you do in graduate school. Okay, so I'm going to kick off part one. What is STEM grad school? So this episode will cover quite a bit of material. We're going to talk about, what is it, literally, first. So STEM graduate school is either the path to obtain a master's degree in STEM or a PhD in STEM. A master's is much less common and it's not tuition free. A PhD actually in STEM is tuition waived. So you would do research or teach. So in theory, you're bringing in, you're doing work for the university and therefore you're compensated for that work via a small stipend. And then a part of that stipend is the fact that your tuition is waived or paid for through a research fellowship or a research grant. So I'm going to talk more about the PhD aspect versus the master's degree. A master's degree, you would just take coursework, pay tuition, and it's similar to the bachelor's degree in that except you're taking advanced courses. Sometimes master's degrees also have a research component where you would complete research with a faculty member, advisor, and then publish a master's thesis, potentially publications too, dependent upon the group. But the PhD is much more common, and it's where I'm going to kind of focus. So if you're determining whether or not you would pursue the master's or the PhD, I would always recommend that unless you're just taking master's courses as an undergraduate student and then end up with a master's equivalent, I would always recommend going directly for the PhD. It is a longer period of time, but in the grand scheme of things, it's not much longer than a master's, and it's more valuable for more careers than a master's is. If you are interested in a field, a career path that only requires the master's, then that would be the one time I would say, okay, then maybe it would be worth it to you to get your master's degree and then transition directly into the job force so that you can start making money. So investment up front, but a return on that investment since you would be working instead of pursuing a PhD that you don't need. So pick your career and that would be how you would figure out that path. But again, focusing on the PhD more so than the master's. So what is it? It's a typically 5 to 7 year program where you pursue research, take some advanced courses, do some teaching, and then at the end of that term, you are given an PhD. And it's an advanced field of study, an advanced analysis of your field. So you're learning a niche in a particular field of STEM. You're doing research to understand it better and contribute to the scientific community. You're publishing papers. You're doing some teaching, taking advanced courses, and the goal is to become an expert in a particular niche of STEM. So that's in a generalized, what is it? You're also learning a number of problem solving skills, troubleshooting, critical thinking. The skills that you learn in a PhD are broadly applicable to many different fields of work. If you even just ignore the content that you've learned, it's a very interesting process because it changes the way that you think and approach most situations that you encounter in your professional and personal life. So a PhD is really it's just an interesting degree to pursue. And if you take it seriously and do a good job, you'll come out of it very educated. It's a nice process when you look at what you've learned from it. So, I just want to reiterate that a PhD should not be paid for. It is tuition waived. So that's something that a lot of students and parents don't know. You go to school for typically 5 to 7 years and the tuition should be waived. All you're paying every year is usually some fees, and then if you have to buy textbooks, but you can also get those through the library or purchase international versions that are cheaper. So it's quite inexpensive to go to graduate school. Now, you do get a stipend throughout that process, but it is not typically a lot of money. It's enough money to pay your rent, buy some groceries, and maybe put a little bit away. But it's not, it varies greatly dependent upon the program you get in. And if you are a teaching assistant or a research assistant or a fellow who's receiving a fellowship, those are very different stipend amounts. But in general, you're getting, 40,000 a year. I've heard of programs being as low as 18,000 a year. I've heard of programs being as high as 60,000 a year. So it really depends on what program you're in, and that information, you should be able to find it when you're applying to different programs. So, so you don't pay tuition, you pay some fees every year, typically like a health center fee, which allows you to access the university's healthcare system. You pay for your health insurance, a small amount. And then you also, usually there's like activity fees and things like that, but they usually end up being around 1,000 a year. And don't hold me to that. Every program is different. So look into that. But it's not like undergraduate where you're spending, upwards of 100,000 a year in tuition and loans. So you shouldn't need loans for graduate school. You should be able to just pay your fees, and then you get your stipend when you start working and go attending. So there's a few different things I've mentioned that can pay your stipend. Most graduate students end up with a teaching assistantship. So your first year, you would be taking your courses and you would be teaching some kind of course that's in your major. So monitoring a lab or teaching a lecture. It depends on the university and what they have their TAs do. You'd be grading whatever materials the students hand in. You'd be holding office hours, and at the same time taking your courses and doing research. The goal would be to eventually end up on a research assistantship. Some graduate students end up in groups immediately and they go on to a research assistantship dependent upon if the faculty advisor has funding to support that. So most of the time you TA at least a year because the institution needs TAs to run a lot of the courses and things. But some students do end up on an RA immediately. If you don't end up on an RA immediately, research assistantship, you would want to end up on that in your third year, third, fourth, fifth. Ideally, you would just be doing research. There's nothing wrong with teaching. I taught for the majority of my 5 years in grad school, loved it. But it is a huge time sink and takes away from the time you could be spending on research. There's also fellowships. Fellowships are awarded to graduate students, sometimes through the institution, sometimes through external funding sources. You can apply for fellowships prior to going into graduate school. And you can also apply to fellowships throughout your time as a graduate student. But that's where your funding comes from, one of those three sources. And depending upon which one you have, you're either teaching or just doing research. And none of those awards should require that you're paying tuition. So really important, I'm going to say it a million times, graduate school is tuition waived, which is a great benefit to have when you're pursuing your advanced degree. So, I've kind of touched on this already, but there's a general timeline of the first year to 2 years you're taking courses that are in your field of study and are an advanced look at your major. When I was a professor, I would actually get a lot of questions about the courses in grad school, students just being nervous to take them since they are much more advanced than what you've encountered potentially as an undergraduate. And they are definitely different than undergraduate courses. They're not quite as much homework and doing problems and passing tests, and they're typically very dense, but you have a different perspective once you're in graduate school. Your thinking skills and your self-teaching skills should have been honed a bit throughout the undergraduate process. So when you're approaching the material, it is a little easier to start picking it up since you're getting more advanced throughout your education. But also there's typically not as many exams. The grading is done a little differently. So you're not getting as many, D's and C's in the class. It's more A's and B's, and you're doing a couple exams versus a bunch of quizzes, and it's just a lot less graded work that's assigned to determine a metric. It's more of an individual. You have to, as an individual, learn how to pick up the material on your own. It's much less hand-holding, much less giving you feedback throughout the course, and it's a more independent learning. You go to class, you listen to the lectures, you read the textbook, you pick up the material, and then you take a couple of exams to get through to be assessed. So it is a different experience, and I recommend to not be, too afraid of it, but definitely take seriously that if you're not a student that's able to teach yourself content, that's something you would want to practice a bit before you get into graduate school, because you're going to have to be teaching yourself a lot throughout the courses, throughout the research, throughout your teaching experience. All of that is a very self-driven process. So it's important to learn how to teach yourself and how to set deadlines, set goals for yourself, and then accomplish those deadlines and goals. And if you don't, hold yourself accountable and do better next time, because you're really in charge of your own education a lot with the PhD, which I think a lot of people don't know going into it. It is a very self-guided process. You have resources and advisement and direction if you know where to look for it and ask for it. But the goal is also to be very self-driven throughout that process. So it's the same thing with the courses. So typically you would take courses the first 2 years, and then you would be done with coursework after that, if not earlier. And during that first year, you're teaching, you're finding a group, or you've already found a group, so you're doing some research on top of that. And as you progress through the 5 to 7 years that you're there, the priority is always research, but your time priority will be research more and more as you get further into the degree. And the goal, of course, is to publish while you're pursuing your PhD so that your work is documented and you also contribute to the scientific community. So that's what you're kind of working towards throughout the whole process. There's also a couple major goal posts throughout the PhD process. It varies what it's called dependent upon the program. And of course, there's always programs that are different than others. But in general, after 2 years, you would take what's called a candidacy exam or a qualifier, which is typically a set of exams. And you would give kind of a proposal for what you're going to do for the remainder of your 5 years. So it's basically your first 2 years, you're collecting a lot of preliminary data and getting some results so that you can then put those in your candidacy presentation, which would then be the foundation for what you're planning on doing for the rest of your time in the program. So you're creating a timeline, you have goals, you're looking and examining at different aspects of what you've already accomplished in the research lab. And it's a fairly daunting process. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. It's a lot of work. And if you put in the time and effort, hopefully you pass and move on into the remainder of the remainder of your program, and then you would be a graduate candidate instead of a graduate student because you've passed your candidacy exam. So after that, there's usually some kind of seminar or something that you give throughout the process, and then your final exam would be a defense where you lay out everything you've done, you give a presentation on it, and you have a committee that asks you questions about it. And once you pass that and your committee approves, you would get the PhD. So that's kind of in a nutshell what graduate student is, how much you would pay for it, which should be not much, and how you get funded and the general timeline. So the rest of what I want to talk about for part one is how to determine if graduate school is right for you. So this is kind of tricky because for STEM, a lot of people think automatically that if you get a bachelor's degree in any field of STEM, you're automatically going to graduate school. And that's actually not true. You don't necessarily need a PhD for every type of career in STEM. And you can have a quite lucrative career where you're making six figures or more with a bachelor's degree. You may just need to climb the ladder once you've gotten an entry-level position. So if you've completed your bachelor's degree or you're a junior and you're just, you love STEM, but you don't want to go to grad school, there are options for you. Additional education is not for everyone, and there's no shame in not going to graduate school. Graduate school is a long, arduous process. It's a lot of work. You spend a good chunk of your 20s in graduate school, and not everyone wants to do that. And it's better to find that out before you apply to the program than it is to apply to the program and have to leave and have lost both your chance to get the PhD and what could be 2 or more years that you could have been working in a position and getting raises and promotions. So what I always recommend for anyone that is interested in pursuing a career in STEM is to go look at job listings at places you would like to work, or just in general put in to any job search, bachelor's in chemistry, PhD in chemistry, see what the positions require. Mind you, job listings usually list that they require more than they always do. So don't take every listing that you see for 100% fact. But in general, that's a great way to get an idea. Okay, I see a lab tech position at this place that I think is really neat to work at. They're doing interesting work. What do they require? Okay, they require a bachelor's degree. What's their pay range here? Okay, it's $30,000. That's not enough to do what I had planned on. So what is their next tier of position at this place? Are they looking for PhDs? Do they have bachelor's degrees? What happens when people get into these roles? So you can go on LinkedIn and look up people that work at those places and see what their credentials are. So, there's ways to find out whether or not you need the PhD. If you do plan to go into academia, then you will 100% need to get a PhD, and you will most likely need to do at least one postdoc, sometimes two, sometimes three, dependent upon the prestige of the position and the networking that you have to get it post grad school. So I don't want to talk too much about it, but a postdoc is basically a 1 to 2 to 3 year appointment where you, as a PhD, would go and do research in someone else's lab. And the goal is to give you an opportunity to work independently in research, design your own projects, and gain some leadership experience that you may not have had as a graduate student, in addition to gaining additional perspective on your field. So it's definitely a valuable experience. I can see why it's required for most professorships now. But mind you, if you do intend to go into academia, you would need a PhD, at least one postdoc. And so you want to be certain that that's what you want to do, or you could be spending almost to your 30s in postdocs attempting to get faculty positions. So know what you want to do career-wise ahead of time, or you could set yourself back substantially. So that's how you determine if grad school's right for you. If it's a credential, if the PhD is a credential for the job that you want to pursue. Some people just want to pursue a PhD for, the experience. That's fine. Of course, if that's you, then that's your own separate life goal. What I'm talking about is for the general student that is trying to get a job so that they can then work and support themselves and their future families. So something else I want to mention as well is that you don't have, so let's say you have a degree in chemistry. You don't have to just apply to chemistry PhD programs. You can actually apply to most programs in STEM with a different bachelor's degree. It should be somewhat related. I wouldn't recommend that a biology major applies to some kind of electrical engineering graduate degree, because they're so different. But you could definitely apply to different programs, especially if your undergraduate research or your electives or extra courses align with the research that one of the faculty members is doing in a different department. So, for example, let's say you are a biology major, but you found a faculty member in chemistry that's doing something interesting, maybe some kind of biochemistry or a chemistry that's really relevant in biological systems. You could then apply for that program and mention the faculty members that you're interested in working for. So you're not limited by your undergraduate degree completely, but it should be something that's relevant. And then you should also consider that if it's a very competitive graduate program, that someone with the same degree may be a more competitive candidate than you. Maybe not, but maybe. It's just something to be aware of. If you are one major and you're applying to get into a PhD program of another major, then you may be competing with the people applying to get into the same one. So you had best stand out in some way that makes you more competitive and relevant to their program, and be very clear how you could contribute your unique perspective into that research group. So you kind of have to pick what department you would want to apply to, and then the major itself matters less. It's more about what the faculty members are doing in terms of their research. That's what your specialization would be in. So when you're applying to graduate school, graduate programs typically do require that you complete the graduate record examinations, some kind of a general GRE. You can look those up online, but they're not as daunting as some people think they will be. They're a pretty generalized exam, similar to like what you would have taken in high school, standardized testing, and you go to a center to take those, and it's a pretty straightforward process. Some colleges also require subject GREs, graduate record examinations. Those are more difficult and they are subject based. So they would be like a chemistry GRE or a biology GRE. So you would want to brush up on your material before you go to take those. A lot of colleges do not require the GRE, but they recommend that you take it. In that case, you might consider taking it, especially if you would test well. And then you would want to prepare as an undergraduate to be a competitive candidate for graduate programs. So you would do some kind of undergraduate research ideally, and you would incorporate that undergraduate research into your application very well. So graduate schools usually require obviously a bachelor's degree. They require some kind of testing, either the generalized GRE or both the generalized GRE and a subject GRE or more than one subject. And then they require the application, which is a combination of personal statements, research statements, what you're interested in pursuing, and then just the generalized information such as your transcripts, etc. So it is a decent amount of work to apply to graduate school. So it's not something to put off until the last minute. And you would definitely want to put some time and effort into your statements so that they stand out. So, when deciding if it's right for you, some people go onto forums or read what other people are saying, definitely on social media platforms about how graduate school has a bad reputation. It's just a long, kind of difficult process, but it's just very hard for some people to be self-driven enough to get through the process and still be positive. I think it does get difficult for most graduate students after around the fourth year because at that point you are pretty advanced in your study, you've got a handle on your research, and you're starting to encounter some of the most difficult tasks that you can encounter in academia, publishing, and writing a thesis. So graduate students do tend to be very vocal about how difficult graduate school is, but that doesn't mean that it's a bad process. It's definitely worthwhile if it's necessary for your career. And even for people like me, I had intended to go into academia as a professor and then found out that academia wasn't the right fit. So now I'm in a stay-at-home parent and I work on this podcast as well as other outreach in STEM with the goal of eventually going to back into some kind of position as a returning adult. So would I have gone back now and looked and said, okay, I'm going to be a stay-at-home parent, so I shouldn't bother going to graduate school? No, it was an invaluable experience. I really enjoyed doing the research. I am more educated than I was previously. I think in different ways. I know how to approach problems. It really helped me become more professionally mature. I got experiences to present at conferences, so many different conferences. Really enjoyed doing that. I networked with different faculty. I learned so much material, got to read, probably millions of papers. I went to multiple seminars. I learned so much throughout my 5 years in grad school. So it was extremely an invaluable experience for me, and I would never have gone back if I could go back in time, have not gone again. So it really depends but at the same time, it was exhausting. I worked a considerable number of hours. I was really careful with my research. I made sure that my samples were pristine. I, worked up all my data and triple checked everything. Took a lot of pride in keeping my workspace clean. I trained many different undergraduates that worked in the same lab. So, yeah, it's a lot of work. And by the time you get to your 5th year, it's exhausting and you're ready to be done. But that's good. You have to kind of turn that exhaustion into motivation to then get through it, get your papers published, get, some conference experience, get your thesis written, and produce a product that you're proud of. So you kind of have to weed through the bad reputation of it and just realize that, things that are worth pursuing, such as a PhD or any kind of advanced education, are worth the work and the trials that come with them, because you're bettering yourself, your education, and professionally and personally as well. So definitely, and there's support systems as well if it does end up becoming too daunting or you need help throughout the process. There's always a resource at the university level that can help you with that. And you can make sure that your family and friends are also aware that you're going through the process too, so that you have a support system external to the university as well. So, yeah, it's a lot of work and it is exhausting, but it's definitely worth it, especially if you're very interested in your field or passionate about your field. And when it all comes down to it, if you need it as a credential to pursue whatever career path you have ultimately. So, I also had many students worried that they couldn't handle it. And if it's something you think you can't handle, you have to really look at the experience, learn more about what the experience is, and assess it and have confidence in yourself. But also be aware of your limitations, be aware what you need to do to better yourself as a candidate, and think about that as an undergraduate. Like, what skills do I need to succeed in graduate school, and how can I hone them now so that going to graduate school is a less, I don't know what word I'm looking for. I keep saying daunting, and I don't want to use the same word over and over again. But how can you, get your skills under your belt now so that it is easier when you get to grad school? So yeah, I think anyone can handle it if it's something that they want to do and they're aware going in that it's a substantial amount of work. And I think it can be a hit to your confidence. So it's good to build that confidence before you go in, and then just keep pushing yourself to get to the end. So, and learn and try to enjoy your research and the prospects of what a PhD will allow you to pursue ultimately in your career. So that's kind of what I wanted to talk about part 1. We're at about 30 minutes now, so I think I'm going to separate part 2 and part 3 into their own episodes. So please tune into those if you found that helpful. Part 1 helpful. Part 2 is going to be talking more about specifically how to choose a program, how to apply to that program and make your application stand out. And then part 3 will be what to expect once you are accepted into a program, what happens next. And I'll talk a little bit more about the graduate timeline and, candidacy, defense, that sort of thing. Okay, so thanks so much for listening to the STEM Faculty Podcast. Again, I'm Dr. Marissa. I hope this was helpful. If you do have any questions or things you would like to add, I am accessible on social media. I have a Twitter/X as well as a website. All the links for that are on our Spotify profile page. And you can listen to us on Spotify. We're on Amazon Podcasts and Audible, as well as Apple Podcasts. So tune in wherever you like to listen, and I appreciate your support. Have a great day.